name is Anil Kolipara. I'm the head of our test and automation portfolio at Spirent Communications. We are now part of Keysight. Spirent has been providing leading test and measurement solutions to the industry for over multiple decades. My personal responsibility includes testing solutions for 5G, cloud, security, and automation. If you look at enterprise 5G as a service, that represents a very big opportunity for the CSPs from a monetization and a growth perspective. But unlike the traditional 5G customer or the consumer side of things, enterprises, although we call them as one segment, they are pretty diverse. There are enterprise consists of manufacturing, healthcare. You can think about various industries in agriculture. All of these different industries have very varying needs in terms of both technical as well as business requirements. In general, 5G as a technology represents a transformation to the industry in how networks are built using more and more disaggregation and software. And one of the artifacts of that is that now you have a very complex supply chain of components that go into a 5G network, and this could be hardware, software, across a very complex and multi-vendor supply chain. So these create very significant operational challenges to the CSPs and the enterprises. So if you think about challenges and the challenges that are actually keeping the CSPs up at night, I would classify them into these three, right? Number one is, how do I be competitive in the market in terms of my offerings, especially when it comes to enterprise 5G, right? How do I differentiate myself? The second one is, how do I, even if I have an offering and a competitive offering, how do I make sure that I'm monitoring it? How do I make sure that it is meeting the SLAs of the guarantees that I provided to my enterprise customers? And the third one is, how do I do this while being operationally efficient? So these are, I would say, the top challenges that the CSPs are facing right now. Telefónica has been a customer of Spirent and a partner of Spirent for over multiple decades, actually over 2 decades. And we've had a very successful partnership with them. Telefónica understood that 5G is different, right? It represents a major shift in the network, and they understood that they have to bring in components, both software and hardware, from a very diverse multi-vendor ecosystem, and that represented an operational risk or challenge. So they decided to build a CI/CD CT platform that partnered with Spirent so that they can integrate Spirent's vast test library using our rich API framework and test any kind of service that they are offering to their enterprises, and make sure that it is compliant, it is giving the right performance, and it is resilient and reliable. And they wanted to build this in a CI/CD CT environment because they knew that these changes are happening very dynamically, right? Changes to the network, to the service are happening very dynamically. So they need a way to test any kind of change that is coming into the solution. So building this in an automation pipeline really helped them address that. The unique aspect of an enterprise 5G offering is that these offerings typically come with some kind of an SLA, a guarantee. So this could be some kind of tiers like silver, gold, and platinum services that have relevant tiers. So what this partnership and the solution we put together also helps is make sure that the Telefónica is able to meet the SLAs of these tiers, and make sure that they're monitoring them and addressing any kind of issues very proactively. And it represents a blueprint to other CSPs on how they can address the challenges we talked about, and make sure that you're building a new methodology and a new framework to be able to address them in this new 5G world. I might have touched that in my previous interaction. I brought up SLAs. Let's double click on that, right? While 5G as a technology, whether it's for consumer or enterprise, itself represents a very complex technology because it has more number of interfaces, more number of moving parts, more number of updates that are happening. One key differentiator that is different from an enterprise 5G and a consumer 5G is the SLAs, right? What do I mean by SLA? SLA meaning, like, for example, an enterprise that is doing industrial manufacturing may need a service that provides, 20 milliseconds of latency, right? And it is very important for them to continue their operations. And these SLAs are much more stringent because one, you're guaranteeing them as part of your offering. And then two, if there is any service degradation to this SLA, it is not only impacting a single user or a person, it may have ramifications on the entire enterprise business in terms of their offerings and their impact to their business, right? So this becomes much more challenging. So the CSPs have to make sure that the services are much more resilient and much more reliable, and they're able to meet the SLAs continuously, and it's not just one-time activity. Very interesting in the fact that everything else is very dynamic, right? Everything is actually changing very rapidly. And make no mistake, right? Even if you launch certain offering today, you might have to launch new offerings, in the near future. You might have to now maybe, make your SLAs even more stringent to maybe respond to a competitive offering from your competition, right? You may be launching a new service like an AI-based service that requires a completely new set of SLAs and requirements. So things are going to be changing very rapidly. You may have new vendors come into the picture, right? But the way you want to design your test and automation framework could be consistent to deliver consistent results. What I mean by that is having a vendor-agnostic, right, independent third-party test and automation framework that can test, any vendors or any combination of vendors or services is going to be important. So that when you remove or swap some vendors in the future, it doesn't really impact. You don't have to rip and replace the test framework. You can just leverage the same test and automation framework, but maybe you may have some new API calls, right? So the way you can keep your operations consistently is to think of a vendor independent approach, and make sure that as you evolve your offerings, as you bring in new pieces of equipment, that's not going to disrupt your operational aspect of delivering these services to the customers. So if you look at in terms of that, how do we achieve this objective? There are three parts to it. Number one is the testing categories. That means, what are you actually testing, or what are the different things that you're testing? 3GPP, for example, as a specification body, can specify just functional or compliance requirements, but it doesn't specify performance requirements. It doesn't specify reliability, resilience, right? Things like that. So you need to evolve from traditional testing methodologies that include not only functional and compliance testing, but also non-functional testing. And this includes, as I said, performance testing, right? Testing for capacity, testing for reliability and resiliency. For example, if you have 5G, which is based on cloud native infrastructure, what happens when there are issues or impairments happening in the COTS infrastructure? Is your service and the network reliable and resilient to do those kinds of impairments? So doing beyond traditional functional testing into these non-functional complex testing scenarios is very important. So that's number one. Secondly, the test methodology in terms of testing the nodal aspect of it, what we call as wraparound testing. So you are wrapping around each of the element of their network function and testing to make sure it's compliant, right, to the specifications, then progressing to adjacent testing and end-to-end testing. This ensures that each of the multi-vendor elements are adhering to the specifications, and if they are not, you can address and fix them ahead of time. And you can be much more sure that when you put all of these things together, they work well together from a multi-vendor perspective. And lastly, automation, right? This is most important thing. So you want to take all those non-functional testing, you want to take this test methodology but wrap them into an automation framework so that you are doing this on a continuous fashion and not just a one-time sporadic activity that's not going to give you anything. You have to test this, especially if there is any change happening in any part of the network. You want to test this very continuously. So I would say a combination of these three things would help address the objective here.